Tonight, mostly clear, overnight low of 31. Monday's weather sunny with a high of 44. Tuesday, sunshine and 45. Wednesday, an 80% chance of rain, possibly mixed with snow, and a high of 46. Thursday, mostly sunny with a high of 45. Friday, sunshine and 44. And Saturday, sunshine and 43.
ON, AM, and FM.
Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Are aliens trying to influence us through advertising and movies? Where did Mothman come from? Do ghosts experience perpendicular time?
Hello and welcome to the 971st edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, on YouTube and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and that was Paul, and today we bring you an open line show to answer all sorts of questions from listeners all over the place, and we have a special guest co-host to help us out with all of these questions.
Co-hosting with us via Skype today is the legendary Tim R. Swartz. Tim is an Emmy Award-winning television producer and videographer, and is the author of a number of popular books. A well-known broadcaster, Tim has investigated unexplained phenomena all over the world, has appeared widely in the media.
So Tim Schwartz, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Hey guys, thank you for having me back. I'm more than happy to be with you on the 971st edition of Behind the Paranormal. That's wild.
Oh yeah, we'll wait till 1,000 show in June. Anyway, let's, here's an interesting one. Let's start with Phil. Phil was a show reporter for years. He's now in Savannah, Georgia. And Ben, why don't you take this one if you
Sure
can?
thing. I can. And what we are going to talk about is from Phil. My intuition tells me Paul won't like this question, but here it goes. Does your take on the infamous Annabelle doll that the Warrens had locked up in their... Or what is your take on the infamous Annabelle doll that the Warrens had locked up in their basement? Can a negative parasitical entity from the multiverse cause a plain doll to create so much chaos?
Well, since I don't like the question, why don't you start with that, Tim?
Oh yeah, thank you. You know, that's... I have experienced myself just, items that appear to be haunted, or at least have something going on around them. Now, as for the Annabelle doll, at this point, it's so wrapped up in hype and different stories. It's hard to tell at this point, how much of it is actually true and how much of it has, been glommed on, for Hollywood and just for giggles. But, I do think that material objects can become a focal point for paranormal activity. Years ago, I had a girlfriend that she had bought a headboard for her bed. It was an antique headboard, and as soon as she brought that thing into her apartment, it was just like it became like Grand Central Station for just all kinds of weird activities. I mean, the knocks on the wall, all of the traditional, stuff, items disappearing. She started having bad dreams at night where she felt like that somebody was standing over her trying to strangle her. Now, when I was there, anytime that I was there, nothing ever happened. But then again, I tend to be a negative whirlpool when it comes to clomping down on paranormal activity. But I mean, she was somebody that was never really a believer in this kind of stuff. But, and as soon as I told her after a while, I said, well, the only new thing in this place was this headboard, so let's just get rid of it. And as soon as we got rid of it, everything stopped. At least that's what she told me, and I have no reason to disbelieve her. So I do think that items that you wouldn't traditionally think of being a focal point for paranormal activity can do so. Why? I have no idea.
All right, Ben?
Well, it's an interesting question. If only to kind of sort of understand that an environment kind of matters, I don't know if it's so much the object as it is the environment, right? So it's kind of like I want to think of it like a tide pool, right? So inside the pool, you could put things in it like rocks or different sort of things, and maybe put a snail in there, or a little hermit crab or whatever.
Well, Tim's from Indiana. I don't know if he knows about tide pools.
Oh well.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, whatever the Indiana equivalent of a tide pool is.
No, I know what those are.
Well, good. So, but I'm trying to think of that as a metaphor, because I think it's important to note that when an environment changes, of course, phenomena can change. I would guess. I think we look for a simple explanation, as in, aha, a doll came in and the doll is haunted. When it's like, well, the environment could have had something going on before it, and perhaps whatever was there before, maybe if you want to say it's an entity or the Hutchinson effect, whatever you want to throw at that, you can say, all right, well, it picks up the doll and throws it around, and then things happen. I don't know if it's particularly the doll, but it's something I don't know enough about, because I think it's because I've never really experienced it. And the only sort of thing that I can kind of equate it to is sort of this like Schrodinger's cat type thing, where you walk into a space and you're like, there's going to be a ghost here, and then you look for anything to find ghost here. And so, if you're saying my headboard is haunted, you look for things to say headboard haunted. And so, I would say the same thing with doll haunted. It's one of it. I think that's kind of the line of thinking that I'm going in is, you go in and you expect to find something, you're going to find something to confirm it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, now, in my case, I knew Annabelle very well. I knew her when.
Did you have tea?
Well, she wanted to, but I didn't have time. I was unhurried. But Annabelle, of course, being a Raggedy Ann doll that the Warrens had locked up in this tunnel that went from their house to their art studio in a barn. And in the corner of the tunnel, they had the beginnings, because I was working with them pretty early, the beginnings of their paranormal museum. And, of course, the Annabelle was at the center, was a cross on the box, and it said, "Do not open under any circumstances." What the heck is this?
Showmanship.
Yes. On the other hand, I never had anything happen to me because of Annabelle. But on the other hand, and you and I haven't run into this a lot when we're working together, but before that, I would run into, quote, haunted objects, unquote. And my feeling on that, looking from a viewpoint of quantum mechanics, is that you have consciousness waves. I remember the haunted suit of armor in one of the Newport mansions. Excuse me. And I think that within this consciousness wave, now what is that? Picture an LP vinyl record. I think everybody knows what that is. And suppose there are lumps in it. Those lumps are the people and the things that you know and maybe love or don't like or whatever, but the people who are part of your consciousness. Now, when you take an object, and I've seen this happen, one of the wildest cases I ever dealt with is before your time, Ben, 1998, in Burrillville, Rhode Island, right in our listing area. They brought a little innocent, ordinary table that they got in an antique shop, put it in their house, and all hell broke loose. All right, and we've had people come up to us after lectures and say, I'm a healthcare professional or I'm a lawyer or something. Never believed in this stuff, and then this object came into my life, and all hell broke loose. And so I think that when the consciousness wave is involved, and you bring an object that's been an important part of somebody else's consciousness wave, everything gets mixed up, tangled up.
Kind of like when airplanes get rebuilt with like old parts
Yeah.
from crashed planes.
Yeah, I've talked to airline staff who said that when parts from crashed planes are recycled, weird stuff starts to happen on their aircraft. And I've heard that from all sorts of different things. So I think it's a matter of consciousness waves. And if a parasite is involved, as we would call it, involved in that same consciousness wave, and it gets mixed up with yours, there are going to be repercussions and echoes from that. And maybe the parasite, being a multiversal creature, might cross over.
So here's a follow-up question. I'll direct it to either of you because now I'm thinking along the lines of like Jungian archetypes, right?
Yeah.
So do you believe that symbols, right? So let's say something like a crucifix or a star or whatever. Do you believe that has some sort of power in that sort of realm of consciousness waves, or is there some sort of universal thing that makes a symbol powerful?
I'm going to hurl that right at Tim.
I think it's more along the lines of if you believe it has power, then it could. But there's also the aspect that if you have a large group of people who believe that a symbol of some kind could have power, then I think that also could have an effect. It's like it makes me think of the movie The Vampire Killers, and I'm missing the first part of that title, but its subtitle was "Pardon me, but your teeth are in my neck." And there's a scene where this old Jewish innkeeper has been made a vampire, and he's getting ready to attack his female servant, and she brings out a cross, and he laughs at her and he says, "Oi, if you got the wrong kind of vampire." So I think that that may have a lot to do with it. If you actually do believe that something is going to work, that does give it a power somehow. Possibly, as Paul was saying, within the realm of quantum physics. But I also I wanted to ask a question as well. Would this also include, when it comes to replacing parts, the phenomena people have experienced who have had organ transplants, where they'll suddenly find themselves having the same interest as the person who donated, the organ, kidneys, or whatever, suddenly develop an enjoyment of foods that they didn't like before, but they find out later that the person who donated the organ liked. So, I mean, this could go on to, several different aspects.
Oh, yeah. We did a whole show on that with Marcus Loth, the British researcher it's absolutely fascinating when you look at those. That doesn't happen every time there's an organ transplant, but very often all kinds of interesting mixed up consciousnesses or whatever, or blended consciousnesses occur. Now, on the issue of, I guess, Ben's question, I agree with you, Tim. I think it's very much as you said. So, you can leave it at that and move on to the next question. But I think it's an idea that we share. Consciousness is shared. We're not islands. So here's from our good friend Peter Shelley in Bogota, Colombia.
Sure thing.
For something completely different.
And now time for something completely different. Explosion sound. Hi, Paul, from Peter. Does anyone have information or stories of possible paranormal phenomena in connection to the JFK assassination? For example, I have read reports that celebrities such as Red Skelton and Telly Savalas claimed premonitions of the event.
Tim?
Yeah, this is a great story, and there used to be a lot more of them out there, but I think that as time goes by, these stories tend to disappear, and I think that the one that he is thinking about the most is the one that happened to Red Skelton, who, by the way, is a Indiana boy or was an Indiana boy. But this, I know I ran across this story first in one of John Keel's books. I think it was Our Haunted Planet. Don't quote me on that, but I think that was the one. And a lot of people have after that kind of tried to debunk it, but under a number of interviews, Red Skelton did confirm that this happened, and he said that. During the, and I'm looking at my files that I collected for this. Red Skelton told the National Enquirer, and you have to remember that the National Enquirer used to be a journal, even though it was considered a tabloid newspaper. They vetted all of their information extremely well. They were very conscious on not publishing anything that was false, since they dealt a lot with celebrities, so they wanted to make sure that everything that they said was accurate. But Red Skelton said that during the 1962-63 TV season, that he had taken a vacation on in Hawaii, and he said that he always carried a notebook with him, just in case, something funny would hit him and he could write it down. He said that he was lying on the beach one day, and he said he was neither awake or asleep, and he had his eyes closed, and he said that he had his notebook with him, and in his one hand he had his pencil with him, and just kind of lazing away. And he said that when he kind of came out of this, to his surprise, he saw that he had written, even though he didn't remember writing this, President Kennedy will be killed in November. And that was it. And he said that the handwriting was his handwriting, and naturally it then came true on November 22nd. Skelton said, "I've still got that page, and every time I come across it, I wonder about it, because how it happened, I still don't know."
Yeah,
that's probably the best known one.
Yeah. Of course, one hears all sorts of stories like that. I'm not really familiar. I remember where I was that day. I'm sure you do too, Tim.
I was pretty small then.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you're
I do remember, yeah.
a little younger than I am, but yeah.
Where were you?
I was riding with your grandma down Main Street of East Hartford, Connecticut, when it came over the radio. I was 10 years old. So, and she started to cry. So, anyway, not a good day for the country. I think we've gone downhill since. Nevertheless, so let's go to Facebook. And it went from Stephen in Perth, Western Australia.
Sure thing. Stephen from Perth writes to us. This is regarding our October 23rd show on UFOs and advertising. Does that mean they are here already and trying to influence us via advertising imagery? Shock, horror. Does anyone remember E.T. and Close Encounter movies?
Okay, well, we certainly remember the films. The show was with Peter Robbins that day. It's available on iTunes, etc., and at BehindTheParanormal.com in the archives. A very interesting show where the Peter was sort of reserved judgment on whether the corporate world or the government is trying to get people sort of used to the idea of UFOs. Well, what say you on that, Tim? I don't know if aliens are directly influencing us through the TV ads on the prime time, but what say you?
Well, I mean, this is something that has been talked about for, probably since, Kenneth Arnold saw, something flying around in the state of Washington. I think that whether or not it was deliberate there does seem to be, since that time, and boy, I mean, I remember, growing up, Saturday morning cartoons always had lots of outer space themes with, silly or friendly aliens, and it just seemed to, increase from that point, and I think it's led now to the idea of the reality of extraterrestrials really being taken as a matter of fact because of that pop influence. I mean, not only did you have like Saturday morning cartoons, you had movies and television movies and television commercials as well that features UFOs landing with aliens, then popping a popular soda and drinking it in front of the witnesses, and then flying away and things like that. And again, whether or not this was something that was deliberate, which I doubt. I mean, it's a great story, but I don't think that the UFO mystery has managed, the reality of it has managed to get out into corporate America, or really even the government who's trying to influence corporate America, than to influence the public. But I do think, though, that because of these pop culture references, that the whole scenario that used to be written about the government afraid to reveal the reality of UFOs because people would then panic and take to the streets and burn things down, probably wouldn't happen, just because we've been so conditioned at this point from all this pop culture reference to accept the idea that we're not alone in the universe, and there could be a good possibility that they're visiting us. Again, whether or not it's deliberate or not, I doubt it.
Ben?
I remember specifically from that show, I wrote down a note that I remembered it because I thought it was important. I didn't get a chance to bring it up. Was that there was a really big theme in the advertising that they would use this UFO imagery in a couple of different, really one major vein. Anything in more developed countries, it was all based on technology. That was the big theme. Was that power companies, cars, speakers. There were a lot of audio companies that used them, and I thought that was kind of funny. But it was interesting because the ideas of it was like it's what I think it's what people think of as the future, right? We think of technological advancement, and when we say advanced species, we mean technologically advanced. And so this evocative imagery of UFOs, of being these technologically advanced things by this speaker, by this car, and for whatever reason it was Audi of Europe. That was all about that. And it's the way of the future. And that was sort of the whole thing, was that major theme of technology and this way towards the future and sort of transcending into a technological space. And I think that's really important because, taking a step back of understanding symbols, it's not exclusive to religion. It is also in our realm of the paranormal, and especially depending on who you talk to and how they view sort of the mythology of the paranormal. In other words, the greater story that we're all a part of, especially investigating the fringes of reality, yeah? And so the idea of UFOs, especially nowadays, has changed ever so slightly because of I want to say that it's a reaction to, hypermaterialism. Instead of nuts and bolts craft, there's this idea of it being completely intuitive, right? So it's all about the spiritual. And so this idea of technology leading to either A, spiritual revival, or B, leading us to the future technologically, or some sort of a weird mesh of of the two, right? Like the ghost and the machine type thing. It's I think the idea of it in advertising is not really pointing us to oh, they're here among us. This is like a trick for disclosure. I think it's more of this trying to understand this portion of our reality and taking this symbol of something that's outside, other, that we perceive as the way of the future, and integrating it into technology. Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It's not so because the point that Stephen does make, I read this incorrectly, and I do apologize, Stephen. Does anyone not remember E.T. and Close Encounters movies? And along that same vein, it's not really shocking in horror because you had War of the Worlds, you had all these other things, and it's not really a stretch of the imagination that it would go into advertising. But I think it's a different dimension. Because those are movies, right? You're there to watch. It's there to entertain. You're there to sympathize or sort of see from the point of view of the main character. But with advertising, that's aimed directly at you. You're not participating in a movie, right? You're not trying to put yourself in the character's shoes. This is something that's directed at you, and it's directing you in a certain direction to buy something, to move in a direction.
Well, I think too, just the advertising exposition in those two films was pretty striking. Certainly, the Budweiser Clydesdales were front and center before, the guy Roy sees the Devil's Tower and the Close Encounters and all this sort of thing, and that was everything to the Piggly Wiggly supermarkets.
The pig.
From the South, the pig, as your Southern cousins call it. So anyway, you can see his point there. But if anyone wants to, we're going to take our break, but if anyone wants to see that show with Peter Robbins on UFO imagery and advertising, October 23rd, show 968. You can find it in the archives, and it's on iTunes and all those different things. And there is on our page, because it's difficult to do, it was sort of illustration heavy. That's hard to do on the radio, but we have a page on our website.
That's what color commentary is for.
Yeah, the talking points page. And the one that struck me was the one with the lady and the little flying saucer coming back from the market with the dog and the daughter.
It was a power company. That's what the ad was for.
Yeah, support the electrical industry. We'll give you flying cars. But it's just that we always, maybe you did too, Tim. When we were kids, we thought everybody, and I didn't think ahead to the 21st century that much, but we'd all be in flying cars. But the wildly impractical nature of that is everybody has a pilot's license and all this stuff. So what the power company was thinking of, I don't know. So anyway, you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno and our special guest co-host, Tim Swartz, today on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's wet Blackstone Valley. And we'll be right back.
There is nothing like the beauty of a little holiday tree to liven up the holidays. Join us at the St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center for its annual Trim a Tree classes on Wednesday, November 30th at 1 p.m. or 6 p.m. Create and decorate your very own tabletop boxwood tree. This popular event sells out every year. A light meal is included. Private classes are available for groups of 15 or more. For tickets or additional information, visit Vos True Value Hardware or the St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center website.
You can depend on us for public service, ON Radio.
And it's Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON AM and FM. And welcome back. And we also have our great guest co-host today, our good friend, Tim Swartz. So let's take our next question, Ben.
Yes, we can go to, though this one's a bit long, but we still have time, so let's get right into it. So Jacob from Michigan writes to us, what is the Mothman? Is it possible that human negativity could create such a creature? And there's follow-up questions to this, but I guess we'll just take one at a time.
Okay. Tim, you want to fly off with that one?
Oh, wow. What is Mothman? Well, sheesh. And I know I don't have to go and explain to your audience the whole Mothman mythology,
right?
But Yeah, that's really the $1 billion question. I suppose that's right up there along the lines of what are UFOs or what are ghosts. Um, yeah, it's one of those things that we were talking earlier about. Um, Objects as symbols and whether or not they have power or not. And I think that Mothman has kind of become something along those lines because it just didn't appear in West Virginia in 67, 68 and then disappear. It's the Mothman has cropped up at other locations allegedly. Currently it's still being seen around the region in Chicago and Indiana and Wisconsin. Some people believe that it is a harbinger, an entity kind of like a banshee almost that would appear as almost like a premonition to something bad that's going to happen in the future. Fortunately, the Mothman sightings in the Chicago area so far, knock wood, nothing has happened. But again, it makes you wonder whether or not it's a situation where people will have a bizarre experience, and then the human mind and the collective consciousness then starts piling on that and causing more appearances to happen. Because once that collective consciousness starts accepting that something could be real, then surprising enough, you have more sightings under in various locations. Why West Virginia? Why the Chicago area? Why other locations? I mean, that's one of the great mysteries. That's why we do shows like this. And it could be something just as simple as like we've talked about Paul's idea that you're seeing something that is intruding upon our reality from some other reality for whatever reason. I mean, I tend to mull about the idea that there are areas that there are window areas that the fabric of reality is thin at times, and that these kinds of things can intrude. But again, why Mothman?
Yeah.
You might as well ask why Bigfoot or Dogman or anything, any of the other, thousands of cryptid creatures that you see. I think that Mothman has kind of become, an archetype, so to speak, and that, people see the, like two red eyes glowing in the dark, and, maybe your mind then puts a body around those red eyes. Maybe somebody who hasn't heard of Mothman would instead see, like a Bigfoot or a Dogman or a fairy or a brownie, depending on, what your cultural beliefs and expectations are.
Yeah, I agree pretty much with that. But I always think back on the media wanting to call it Batman in 1966, but they were afraid of a giant lawsuit because the show with Adam West was about to begin, and so it became Mothman. Ben?
I do think that that's an interesting idea that that Mothman is sort of this consciousness construct. But I don't know about that. I think it's interesting that it sort of coincides with Legends of the Thunderbird as well. Essentially as like a Native American harbinger of doom or major events or something like that. I think this is a point I wanted to make earlier, but I'll make it now, that there's all these sort of parallel, I don't want to say parallel, there's sort of these universal stories we all sort of tell each other, and they pop up in every culture. I think we, as good modern Americans and modern people in general, we don't have any accommodation for these things except for the paranormal. So we try to figure these things out. So we're like, I guess Mothman. That's it. That's what you get is Mothman, and he pops up and he chases teenagers in cars and steals Bandit the dog, and does all these things, and it's just the stories that we made out of something that's happened before in history. None of these things are new, so it's definitely one of those things that I don't know if we're ever going to get a solid answer on. But I guess my sort of method is understanding similar stories that have popped up throughout, at least in the American history. There's also another sort of little, I don't know how true it is, tale that there were sightings of Mothman during the Chernobyl disaster. I don't know if that's real or not. Since most of the survivors are no longer with us, unfortunately, you can't really ask. And plus, it's like you're the plumes of smoke. Of course, you're going to see dark things flying around there. So it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things that we're probably never going to get a solid answer on. But the Jacob goes on to continue his question with. I've heard you talk about people that have had good experiences with Mothman, which we mentioned. Is there more than one Mothman? is his follow-up question, and what are the latest sightings?
Well, you two fellows covered the previous question very well. We've had several of those guests on the show who said that they're in the minority. But one fellow said that he had encountered, he and his family encountered Mothman on the road. They lived in the area of Point Pleasant. And all of a sudden, like a day later, he was really good at math and developed musical talent that he hadn't had before, things like this. And he credited Mothman with it. And he said he's still in touch with Mothman, whatever it is. So, and then other people have said they've had positive experience. There was one healing that supposedly occurred. So I guess, there's two sides of the coin with all this stuff. And as we say, maybe if you bring a positive attitude toward you'll have a positive experience with many kinds of paranormal events, unless that's a really negative situation. So I don't know, Tim?
Well, that reminds me now, this wasn't a Mothman, but it was close, and this happened in near Dayton, Ohio, where this family, they were in the middle of the night driving down this road, and suddenly in their headlights there was a giant bird, and they said it looked like a vulture or a buzzard. Except that it was as tall as a man. They said this thing was huge. It was standing in the middle of the road, and when they caught it in their headlights, it suddenly threw its wings out, and they said that its wings were so wide that it completely covered the width of this country road, and then it took off and flew away. Well, of course, they slowed down and stopped to see what was going on, and it was a good thing that they did, because just around the corner a bridge had collapsed.
Oh, wow.
There had been a lot of heavy rain that night, and this small bridge, over this, it was just a creek, but it was swollen at this point, had been washed away. And if they had continued on at the speed that they had been going, they just would have plunged right into this creek. But somehow, this was like, rather than being a harbinger of doom, it was a warning. Yeah,
but these synchronicities are really amazing. Ben? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think that's really, I think that harkens back to what I was saying about Thunderbirds, because it's similar to that. And I also kind of thought, I don't know why this just occurred to me. There was someone, I forget who said it, that their theory was, well, maybe Mothman's a robot. because
of the self-luminous eyes.
Right, because of the self-luminous eyes and the fact that it doesn't make any noise and it doesn't really flap its wings. It just kind of extends them and then lifts up.
Yeah, kind of like Buzz Lightyear. Or
Yeah, sort of like a Buzz Lightyear type thing, and just kind of like lifts its wings and sort of noiselessly levitates off the ground and disappears. But that's neither here nor there. I think it's based a lot on by who experiences it, I think, and so we do our best to kind of describe what we're seeing. And so, a weird owl-like thing. I've heard descriptions like that it's kind of like an owl because there's no neck and it's just kind of like a hump or like with like shoulders and like eyes right there. And so I think we're doing our best to describe it, with what little we have. So,
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess really that's all I can really say about Mothman, unfortunately.
Okay, well, I remember we went down to Alabama to speak some years ago. We stopped at the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant. That was a highlight of your trip.
That was a lot of fun. I did really like that.
Yeah.
It was kind of kitschy. It was kind of fun. It was like,
Yeah.
it was nice.
We didn't get to meet Jeff Wamsley, though. He wasn't available that day,
Sadly.
unfortunately. However, he's been on the show. Anything else from Jacob there?
No, that is the end of Jacob's
Okay.
line of questioning.
Well, let's take a moment now for Tim to tell us about himself and his books, some of which we're in, and all the fun stuff you've been doing and what's cooking.
Oh well, as always, we're trying to continue the legacy of Mr. Timothy Green Beckley.
Yep, our good
by producing books that I think that he'd be happy to do himself. This year we put out 2 books that we were actually working with Tim to put together before he passed away. Because that was the way that Tim worked. He usually had about 5 or 6 books, all in various degrees of preparation. And so when he passed away, we had at least 2 or 3 in that progress. And earlier, just really last month, we finished a book that Tim wanted to do, but really hadn't gotten very far along at all. But we got some people together. Myself, Sean Castile, Scott Corrales, Nigel Watson from the UK, and our book it's called Alien Artifacts, and it deals with the whole controversy of people finding allegedly bits and pieces of UFOs or what have you, and of course alien artifacts doesn't necessarily mean little mangled pieces of metal. It could be physical injuries. It could be people who supposedly caught some kind of virus after investigating a UFO site, and then passing away, things like that. So that book is now currently out on Amazon as both an ebook and as a print book, and I'm really pleased with the way that came out, and I think Tim Beckley would have been happy.
I'm sure he would. Well, he said he had on any given month the average of about 3 books that he would publish through Global Communications. Now, we have done many shows over the year with Tim Beckley and certainly with Tim Swartz. And I both of us have been were on their show many times. I get confused which Tim was which. And so I urge you to go back through the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com. We did a tribute show to Tim when he passed last year. So it was, we've had a lot of fun with Tim over the years, and we really, there are no goodbyes. We miss him, but he's still with us. We're still with him. Anyway, what do we have next there, Ben? I think we have time for one more.
We do, and I kind of want to bring up this one question from Leanne in Creston, Iowa, I should say. And she says, I'd like to ask Tim Swartz about his most recent investigations.
There you go.
Oh goodness. Well, and again, we'll go back to the book we just came out called Alien Artifacts, and that was one that myself, I took a lot of time, looking into a lot of these stories that we have seen circulated over the years about the physical reality of the UFO phenomena. And when we say the physical reality, we mean that, things that have been left behind because of that. And, one of my favorite stories, and I'm sure it's been discussed on this show before, and this was a favorite story of Tim Beckley, so I had to include it, was the Joe Simonton story, where, this guy from Wisconsin, and he was a farmer, he was a plumber, well known throughout the community as, just a stand-up guy, and, nothing, weird or strange about him. But he claimed that one morning that this UFO landed in his backyard, and when he went to investigate it, a hatch opened, and there were some, like little guys inside that he said they looked Italian to him because they kind of had like light brown skin, maybe with a slight olive complexion to them. One of them handed Joe a jug and indicated through pantomime that they wanted him to fill it with water, which he did, And when he gave the jug back, he noticed that on the other side of this room, inside this UFO, there was one of the occupants looked like that they were grilling something on a little grill that looked like pancakes. So he indicated that he wanted some of those, and they handed him about 4 of them, and then they closed the hatch, and the ship flew away. Well, J. Allen Hynek and the Air Force actually came out and investigated this case, and took at least 1, maybe 2 of these pancakes to have them sampled. It turned out that the ingredients were very terrestrial. I think it was like buckwheat flour is what the main ingredient was. And Joe said that he tried one and that it tasted like cardboard to him. Oh. But yeah, that's the kind of stories that we were looking at, in this book. They seem to be just overly bizarre, yet from people who really have no axe to grind, no reason to make up a story like this, and then left with physical evidence. But one of the main points of this book is that practically all of the samples that have been collected that allegedly have been associated with UFO activity tend to have very earthly origins. Even though they're found under very mysterious circumstances. So that's one of the great mysteries about all of this, is that, we have evidence left behind, but this evidence tends to not, at least as far as we know, have an extraterrestrial origin to them.
That's really fascinating. I can't wait to see the book. Somehow I never thought of buckwheat pancakes as being alien artifacts, but I never liked them, so maybe I'll take to that. Just in one of our own cases, there's been a relatively recent development. This is our listeners know we work on cases for years, and this is the Pennsylvania Triangle case. Just north of Clearfield County, there is an area that we feel that the envelope of this case has extended to, and there, as a matter of fact. It was quite an amazing synchronicity. Tim Beckley would have loved it. We were approached about this case by the person who had some very strange photographs taken by a security camera. And it so happened he was going to be in Rhode Island the following weekend from Pennsylvania. And I said, do you realize we're like 12 miles from where you're going to be? And so he came to the studio. He didn't participate in the show, but he sat and listened, and we went to lunch later. But there has since, he was a very, very no-nonsense sort of fellow who was had been involved professionally with photography, and he later was able to duplicate these images with reflections and stuff like that. But there is stuff going on in the area, and we're still keeping an eye on that. So that wasn't the question. That was about your cases, Tim. I'm sorry. but stepping on the lines here. So what else are you working on?
Well, right now we are myself and Sean Castile we're just in the beginning stages of working on a book that deals with mimics of man. That's kind of our working thesis of this. And when it comes to not only the whole UFO phenomena, but a lot of paranormal experiences deal with humanoid types of whatevers that look human but probably aren't. The early contactee movement in the 50s especially, there was a lot of talk going around not only with these alleged contactees, but I guess among officials as well, that there was this fear that if we were being visited by human-looking extraterrestrials, that they were infiltrating humanity, that they were putting themselves in positions of, business, politics, or what have you. So, we're kind of taking that idea and running with it, but not, like I said, not just dealing entirely with the UFO phenomena. There's a lot of paranormal or cryptid types of experiences where people will run across something that looks human at first, but then obviously isn't. So like I said, we're just in the very beginning stages of working on this book and starting to collect stories and information. But I'm really excited about it. I mean, I think this is a subject that it's been with us for probably since the beginning of mankind, but I don't think it really has been addressed too much.
No, it hasn't. That's a really terrific idea. Can't wait to see that one. And we'll have you on, and probably Sean with you, to talk about that. Woonsocket, Rhode Island, here where we broadcast from, is not only a center of politics that is bizarre even for Rhode Island, but it has a history of such humanoid sightings. Particularly in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. And our good friend Joe Ferrier, who was on this station once with Tim Beckley in 1965, in Tim's early days, was well known for having some contact. It was a matter of fact, he's in the book, Tim's book, the UFO Repeaters, as a contactee. And he never talked much about that, but he came on our show once, about a year before he died, or two, and talked about that for the first time in public. And so there was a humanoid by the name of Romar Bolak, supposedly, who would turn up here in this area, and there were UFO sightings, and Joe got some spectacular photographs, that sort of thing. So we're familiar with that whole thing, and we can't wait to see the book. Okay, so we're coming down to the wire here, and why don't we take away our announcements?
Sure thing.
Crazy drivers going by.
Yeah, well, hey, it's Sunday. It's
Yeah.
it's just something that kind of happens, and we get used to it, and we move forward.
So-
Ever marching forward.
So speaking of something completely different, we announce with great fascination that Shane Searway, a longtime guest co-host on this show and a colleague of mine for nearly 25 years, has been elected to the New Hampshire House of Representatives. Good luck and well done, Shane. It's not something we get to say every day. So anyway, Tim, we already found out what's happening with you, and is there a website people can go to?
Sure, you can visit my website at conspiracyjournal.com. I'll say that again, conspiracyjournal.com, where you'll find all the weird news and information that they don't want you to know.
Aha, must be popular these days. Okay, and you got a line next, Tim.
I'm sorry?
Oh, that's all right. We'll do it. So look for us at the New England Parafest in Kittery, Maine, April 22nd and 23rd, 2023. That event will kick off the week before that on this show on April 16th, when the event headliners will appear with us. And we'll be at the Para Expo 2023 aboard the USS Salem in Quincy, Massachusetts, May 19th to 21st. We'll be among the speakers and will broadcast live from the ship Sunday, May 21st.
And you can visit our show website, behindtheparanormal.com, where you can find over 1,100 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON, AM, and FM. Also, you can hear many of these broadcasts from all major podcast platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify.
And download our show app. It's free at the Behind the Paranormal main homepage there, behindtheparanormal.com. And it's free. It doesn't do a lot, but it'll give you links to all our recorded shows back, several hundred of them anyway. And our website also has a charity page with links to several good causes we have adopted, including Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Mass., USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, my favorite, Helping Haiti's Orphans, and several others. So what's going on next week, Ben?
So next week, that's November 20th, in his first appearance on the show in 11 years, we'll welcome Michael Cremo for a discussion of forbidden archaeology and alternate history.
I want to find out who's forbidding it.
We
leave you today with a thought from the French-German theologian and Renaissance man Albert Schweitzer. As we acquire more knowledge, things do not become more comprehensible, but more mysterious. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno.
And I'm Tim Swartz. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Broadcasting live and local daily from the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Studio at the corner of Park Avenue and Kennedy Street in Woonsocket. This